Centuria is a dark fantasy manga that also feels like a slice of life series. It's a terrifying story about a boy named Julian that's about slavery and Lovecraftian gods, and it's full of gore. But it's also an uplifting story about sacrifice and found families that seeks to thoroughly explore the true value of a human life. So in this video, I'd like to share my first impression of Centuria, discuss why I love the beautiful art and characters, and explain how this story delivers a refreshing balance of both horror and wholesome. Now, like I said, the story starts off with Julian, and since Trailer Park Boys is my all-time favorite show, we will be referring to him as Jules from time to time. When we meet Jules, we see that he's beat someone over the head and is running away. We soon find out that this man is Julian's master, and he did this so that he could escape his life of slavery. His plan is to stow away onto a ship to another country where slaves can earn their freedom. Little does he know that the ship he sneaks onto is currently being used by a bunch of slave traders and their 100 slaves. And this is where I'm going to stop to point out one of the best ways series creator Tohru Kuramori makes full use of both the dark and wholesome elements of Centuria, namely irony. As you will soon find out, everything in this story has a price, and better yet, no good deed goes unpunished. But you'll see what I mean soon enough. Anyway, to his surprise, the 100 slaves that Jules has never met before all cover for him so that the slave traders don't kill him. In particular, one pregnant woman. So Jules asks why the woman, who we later find out is named Mira, stood up for him. She explains that this is simply how slaves maintain their pride as human beings. And this is a great example of how Centuria sets itself apart from a more typical dark fantasy. Generally, in a dark story, it would be unwise or just plain stupid to be nice to strangers, because it's usually a guaranteed way to get yourself killed. But here, this character gives a perfectly rational explanation for being selfless, namely that when you perform this kind of random act of kindness, it demonstrates that you still have some dignity as a decent person. And this is how you're able to have these kinds of wholesome moments in a dark fantasy like Centuria. Admittedly, they can get pretty sappy, but it avoids that feeling of being corny because it balances these vulnerable moments with a perfectly logical sense of realism. That being said, Centuria is no stranger to harsh realities, as we quickly find out in the second half of the chapter. But real quick, just before I move on, make sure to become a channel member if you're enjoying the video. You get exclusive perks like custom emojis and badges, and you can pick which series I cover next. Now, we soon find out that Mira used to have a son Jules' age, but he died protecting her from slave traders. In response, Jules confesses that his mother sold him into slavery when he was just a little kid. Immediately feeling bad for him, Mira embraces Jules and adopts him into her family. And this is super wholesome for all of about 5 seconds. See, in the beginning of Centuria, we see the slave traders mention that they're using a super sneaky shortcut along the Alode Zone. The Alode Zone is a scary place where pirates and traders alike have been rumored to disappear to, and it's supposed to be home to all kinds of spooky sea monsters. Just think of it as the Centuria Bermuda Triangle. Anyway, the captain thought he was being super sneaky because he was like, I've got it. What if, instead of going through the Alode Zone, we just sail next to the Alode Zone? It's the perfect plan. Fast forward to the Alode Zone, and the captain's perfect plan gets everyone attacked by a creepy sea monster. So, in a desperate attempt to get away, the captain orders his crew to murder all of the slaves for insurance money. In their final act of dignity, the slaves sacrifice themselves to protect Jules and Mira. But just as the captain is about to kill them, a Cthulhu-like sea goddess boards the ship. She tells Jules and Mira that now that they've offered her a large amount of souls, one of the two must now sacrifice themselves. In return, she will bless the remaining person with great power. Now, I definitely can't show you what happens next, and I'm not really even sure I can explain what happens next, so I'm just gonna censor myself here. Basically, Mira forces an early delivery, sacrificing herself in order to save Jules and her new baby Diana. This is why I said irony is a big part of Centuria. This here is like irony stacked upon irony in a big irony sandwich. First of all, the 100 slaves slaves went out of their way to speak up for Jules in the beginning, and now they're all dead. On top of that, Mira actually sacrificed herself with a knife that Jules polished for her in the beginning of the chapter with the blacksmithing skills that he learned from his master, almost like karma for bashing his head in. And finally, on top of all that, Jules finally gets something precious, a baby sister. But this comes at the cost of 100 other lives. Like I said, this is how Centuria balances the dark elements and the wholesome elements. You get these cute moments, but everything has a price and no good deed goes unpunished. Now, on top of a new baby sister, Jules also happens to get new powers thanks to the slimy monster lady. Because he asks for proof that the slaves' lives weren't a waste, Jules is given the abilities and the lives of all 100 slaves. This means he gets the total sum of all their abilities, granting him powers like underwater breathing and super strength, and he has 100 lives. So, like Puss in Boots, just way more. So, with his new powers, Jules kills the slave traders, takes baby Diana onto an escape boat, and sails away to freedom. And that is the first chapter of Centuria. Now, I've seen people say that this is like Berserk or it's like Vinland Saga. Admittedly, I did occasionally feel like this story resembled both of those manga. But after reading 37 chapters, I would say this manga is much closer to Vinland Saga. Saying Centuria is like Berserk is almost like saying Star Wars is like Dune. Besides the fact that it shares the same genre and came afterward, Centuria really doesn't have anything in common with Berserk. Berserk is one of the heaviest stories you will ever read. But like we discussed, Centuria achieves a relatively positive tone while still including the traditional elements of a dark fantasy. In reality, Centuria is more like the dark fantasy version of Vinland Saga. Thorfinn ends up as a slave, earns his freedom, and makes a case for why peace is the most logical way to live. Julian also starts as a slave, also has to raise a baby, also earns his freedom. And like I've been saying, Centuria continuously presents you with the idea of compassion as a rational and beneficial way to live. They're both uplifting stories despite all of the gore and scary characters. If anything, I would recommend Centuria to someone who wants to get into dark fantasy but isn't quite ready to read stories that are as heavy as Berserk. It's nice because you get all of the wholesome characters and all of the scary monsters. Speaking of which, now that I've explained why I love the story so much, let's talk about the art. Now, what I think stands out the most about the art style in Centuria is the world and the monsters. The characters are kind of so-so. I think Kuramori does a great job of the designs in general. I'm just not crazy about the way he draws faces. For example, one of my favorite characters in this series is this beefy knight by the name Angval. Now, I love everything about Angval. I love her cool helmet, her cool armor, her long hair, how tall she is. I really just don't like the faces. It's actually fitting for this kind of story because the characters have these big eyes, so they have these innocent faces that match the optimistic tone, but to me they're just slightly too chibi-ish. I realize this is a me problem, but I just thought I should share that one complaint because everything else about the art is awesome. Also, fun fact, before I move on, Yukinobu Tatsu of Dawn to Dawn drew Angval a while back. And just so you know, Kuramori was an assistant to him as well as Fujimoto. Anyway, I think what stands out the most about the art in Centuria are the action and the scary monsters. Admittedly, I didn't think the action scenes looked that great in the beginning. They kinda have this sort of Hiro Mashima style where it's just like a kick and then a reaction that feels sort of flat. But it does improve pretty quickly. For example, you get a lot of spreads like this one from chapter 17. Here you can see the full force of the knight's attack, and you can almost feel the bone-crushing impact it has on Angval. Plus, they both just look really cool in their armor. And like I said, the monsters are all nightmare fuel in all of the best ways. There's the octopus lady that you already met, there's this wolf monster that you've probably seen by now that looks like he's straight out of Bloodborne, and And there's a bunch of other monsters. But where I think Kuramori's style shines the most is in the scenes where he blends the monsters with the scenery. For example, in this panel, Julian is being chased by sea monsters, and instead of drawing scary fish, Kuramori draws these silhouettes that look absolutely terrifying. You also have this panel of the sea goddess where she reunites with Julian and she takes up the entire page with her tentacles that are all filled with these creepy eyes that are all fixed on Julian. So while it's great to have all of these insane monsters, the best part of the art in this series is whenever Kuramori gives us these creepy, surreal drawings. By doing so, you get to have that story with all of the cute moments, but still looks and feels like a dark fantasy. And that's pretty much Centuria in a nutshell. It is very much a dark fantasy. It has its wholesome moments and uplifting tone, which is why I recommend it as a first-time dark fantasy, but it also has all of the tragedy and insane monsters and gore that veteran fans are looking for. So with cozy characters, beautifully terrifying art, and a story that explores the harsh reality of the value of life, I cannot recommend Centuria enough. But now I'd like to hear what you think. What was your impression of Centuria? How does it compare to other manga? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. Also, don't forget to become a Shonen OG channel member. You'll get exclusive badges and emojis, you get to pick which series I cover next, and you can even get credited in future videos. Also, check out my other manga reviews, which you can find in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.